Okay, kinesiology 230, still in chapter 4, talking biomechanics, and still in that one section, that beefy section we were talking about, where it's mechanical foundations, and there's still a lot more to unpack, so let's get going. We've already gone through these, out of the entire list that we saw earlier, so we're now on to torque, level systems, etc., or lever systems, etc., and we'll go ahead and just jump on in. Okay, so here we are on page 46, and this is specific to torque. And I mentioned it before, you have these joints in the body, and many of them, not the majority of them, are bones that come together to form a joint, and a joint itself rotates about an axis, and as a result, we're creating rotational force. So in this case, we're doing a bicep curl, and we have the dumbbell or barbell over here, and resistance wants to fall to the floor, so gravity is pulling down on the mass that's right here. And then you have a moment arm, and that's your forearm. That's the radius and the ulna. And your pivot point is here. Now it's kind of wonky because you'll learn in another class, you have instantaneous axis of rotation. The pivot point kind of changes a little bit. But just for our practical purposes here, we're going to just focus on the pivot point being the elbow joint. And so the body itself, it has this kind of summation of forces when you do a movement pattern, but oftentimes it's easiest to see it when you do just a single joint exercise like a bicep curl, in terms of you have the force of the muscle contracting, going through the tendon, attaching to the forearm. That forearm, or that contraction and pulling on the forearm is what actually pulls the dumbbell or barbell up. So it's the product of the force times the length of the moment arm. Right, so you have the product of the force times the length of the moment arm, and that goes both ways. You have to produce force to be able to move the moment arm, and then also there's force that's acting upon the moment arm that wants to pull it to the floor. So you have this concept where there's a relationship between the force that the muscles can create and then also the load itself. And when you actually do a workout, your ability to contract and create force becomes less and less and less because you become fatigued as you go through a set. But the resistance itself, the weight never changes. That always stays the same in terms of its mass, but how that resistance moves through what is called a moment arm, how far away the resistance is from your body, matters. And that's going to dictate how that force or resistance feels, right? So the relationship that you see is you have the applied effort, the force, and then you have the force produced by the weight being lifted. And these two kind of, in some cases, if one of them, the effort side, is higher, you'll be able to move the bar. If the force of resistance, the F of R, is greater, then you're not going to be able to move that bar. Matter of fact, that bar probably isn't going to go anywhere. If those are equal, that'd be very much like an isometric contraction where neither the force that the muscle is providing or the force that the resistance is providing can overcome one or the other, and it becomes isometric, where there's no movement at all in the elbow joint. So that these levers that we have, it's the series of different muscles that cause these levers to move, and depending upon the type of lever, and also depending upon the exercise and how we position ourselves relative to gravity, that'll determine how the resistance feels. And this becomes an important conversation when you're working with people to try to elicit a training response. You can do bicep curl in any number of different variations on any number of different pieces of equipment, and it's going to slightly change how the resistance feels. In general, when we start talking lever classes, you have three main lever classes in the body. You have a first class lever, a second class lever, and a third class lever. And sometimes it's a brain bender to remember them. But if we look at a first class lever, that would be a tricep extension type movement. And the book does this where it's a little bit difficult, right? Because you almost have to stand on your head to look at it, because this is the tricep and you're doing a tricep extension almost like you're here pushing in that direction. So it matches, so it pushes in that direction. And what I don't like about this is they probably could have taken this and turned it 90 degrees to make it look a lot more like a tricep pushdown, to make it a little bit more user-friendly. But the idea is this is a first-class lever because of the resistance itself is the same that you'd have like for a bicep curl. It's still at the distal end of the forearm, But what happens is the pivot point stays the same, but where the force is being offered from the muscle is now on the back side of that pivot point, whereas in that bicep curl that we were looking at before, the force that the muscle is providing is on the front side of the pivot point. And we'll look at this a little bit closer here in a second. So I just think this is a little bit awkward to kind of look at, but this is your example of a first class lever. Now we put this next to our second class lever, which is a toe press with a totally different animal, where you have force that the muscle is providing. As it contracts, it's pulling up. The pivot point is almost in line with the force that's being provided by resistance. So it's a little bit different in terms of how these two line up. And if we go one step further and we go to third class lever, that's our bicep curl up here, which we've already explored. And the bicep curl, it's just a matter of where the force being offered by the muscle is affecting the joint. So in the tricep example, it's behind the pivot point. In the bicep example, it's in front of the pivot point, which we saw earlier. And we'll go ahead and kind of take a look at these two side by side so you can really get a better look at that, because it was a little obscured in that last slide. So the tricep extension, if we turn it 90 degrees, here you're doing a typical tricep push down type exercise where I'm pushing down towards the floor. And we know that if we're holding, say, a cable or a rope or a bar, we want to push down to the floor, but resistance, F of R, wants to go upwards. Well, my tricep is on the back side of the arm, it's on the back side of the pivot point. That makes it a first class lever. When we get over to a bicep curl, it's different. You can see side by side now where you have the F of M is over here, the blue arrow, the F of M is in between your pivot point, right? And the F of R. So what happens is the first class and third class lever, this is a real easy way to remember this. Your first class lever is like the example you see with the tricep. The third class lever is on the opposite side of that joint. It's the bicep. And then your second class lever is just like the toe press. It's kind of a real easy way to kind of cheat your way through to remembering this. If you get kind of bogged down in the F of R and the F of M and where the pivot point is and the moment arm of resistance, oh my goodness. And I get where that could be a little bit confusing and overwhelming, but just take my word for it. If you wrap yourself around first class tricep extension or push down, third class bicep curl, that'll be 2/3 of the battle, because the other exercise we're talking about has nothing to do with the elbow, right? So just differentiate those two and you got it made. All right. With these links, you have these different videos that I shot for another class. You can link out to them, but it shows just a different conceptual picture of the idea of first class, second class, and third class, where I use a foam roller and I use a couple other implements to give you a different perspective on first class, second class, third class. I'll let you link out to those at your leisure. This is also from another class, but I like this, and this is the way I taught it in the other class. I used the mnemonic of far away my dog barked after dinner. F-A-R, A-R-F, and E-R. So you end up having, or A-F-E-R. And you end up having this set up where it's far away, my dog barked after dinner. Okay, so getting back to the far away, my dog barked after dinner. When you have this, you look at F for force, A for axis, and R for resistance, and you have F-A-R, A-R-F, or A-F-R. And so like in this example, A, you have far away, F-A-R. So you have the force on one side, the axis on the other, the resistance. So as a person is contracting the muscles in the back of the neck, splenius capitis probably, they're pulling back, and that's causing the front end of the head to come in. If we go ahead and go to the next slide, this is what we were talking about before, our second class lever, which was the calf. And you have the resistance itself is in the middle. The axis is out in front, the ball of the foot. And then the force that's being provided by the calves is in the back. That would be ARF, far away, arf, my dog barked after dinner. And when we look at the last one, AFR, that's our bicep curl that we looked at before. And you just have to flip-flop this diagram to make that work. But you have A on one side, F in the middle, and then the resistance is on the end. So it was the mnemonic that I used to get me through, and hopefully it helps you as well. But far away, my dog barked, arf, parentheses, after dinner. Work for me? Hopefully it works for you. All right, guys, have a good one. Moving on to the next presentation.